Okay, I guess I can go ahead and get started here. I am Adena White. I am the founder and chief storyteller for Blackbelt Media, which produces a podcast we call Blackbelt Voices. We're actually kind of thinking of a different name for it, probably just Blackbelt and dropping the voices, but I only share it with this audience because I know y'all do all this stuff. So anyway, Blackbelt Voices is the podcast. I'm with Blackbelt Media. My sister and our producer, Katrina Dupins, is here today. I'm going to talk a little bit today about Blackbelt Media, the podcast, and kind of like more of our philosophical reasons for doing this and less about the mechanics of things. We heard a lot of good stuff today already about like monetization. I don't think I will tell you anything you don't already know, but just the story of Blackbelt and how we got started. Okay, so Blackbelt Media, we tell the stories of change makers working to make the South a better place for all. And we do this, the main way we do this, and the original way we've done this is through the Blackbelt Voices podcast. So it was 2017, because it was after the 2016 election where I felt like there was a lot being left out of the conversation about Black Southerners. During the election season, you would hear people use code words to talk about Black folks. They would use Chicago to talk about Black people. After the election, after Donald Trump won, you would hear people on the left and in the blue states talk about the South as if we were just the most horrible place for electing Donald Trump, throw the whole South away, it was terrible. But in both conversations, Black Southerners are being left out. Black Southerners, Black people, we can be rural, we can live all over the country. Southerners, we don't all vote a certain way, and most Black people live in the South. Like I think maybe 50-something% of Black Americans live in the U.S. South. So I felt like there was a conversation that was missing about Black Southerners and our role in this country. And so in April 2017, I knew I wanted to do more to tell those stories. And earlier today, one of the speakers had a good comment. They said that you have to think about your avenue for storytelling. So just like you, I write. I work in PR communication, so writing is my most familiar thing. So my first thought was, let's do a blog. So I did one blog post, interviewed a woman I met through work. She's in Tennessee. I interviewed her because she worked for a chamber of commerce just like I did at the time. But then after the election, she also was inspired to do more. So she formed this nonprofit called the Equity Alliance that tried to kind of deal with voting disenfranchisement in Nashville. So she started this she started this nonprofit. So I interviewed her, and then during that interview, she was so passionate. Like she was talking about her mom and stuff, and then she started crying on the phone. And she was at like a softball game with her daughters, so it wasn't being recorded. I was recording it just for my own purpose. And I was like, this will make great audio, but I don't talk, I'm not a podcaster, and I just put it out of my mind. And then so the woman on the far left, in the green, that's Kara Wilkins. She lives here in Little Rock. I knew her through public relations, a public relations organization. And so she was someone I wanted to get to know. I just was always kind of impressed by her. And then I told her about Blackbelt as an idea. I told my sister Katrina about it. Katrina, we were trying to think of names and stuff. So like, they knew about Blackbelt before it was a podcast. And so they were both willing to help out any way they could. Katrina is also a communications professional. She worked in broadcast journalism for years. She's a writer. So like they were going to help contribute stories and anything we needed to make it happen. And so Kara and I were having coffee in Conway one day, and she was talking about, I think, Beyonce and Jay-Z and their cultural relevance or something like that. And I was like, I'm kind of a boring person, you know. I don't know if I'm academic, but I'm just kind of like, I'm not all into pop culture like that. But she's just she's an extrovert, she's my introvert. So I was like, you know what, Kara, if Blackbelt, that thing, you know, if that became a podcast, would you want to be a co-host? And she's like, oh yeah, sure. And then so I was like, okay. And then Katrina, my sister, and I were on the phone. And when we get on the phone, she talks like long time, like 90 minutes. So anyway, we were on the phone talking about like our hopes and dreams, and she had just left broadcast television as a producer to do work in PR. And then so she was like, you know, I'm just a producer in my heart looking for a show. And I said, Trina, guess what? You know, Blackbelt, you know, that's going to be a podcast now. Kara Wilkins is going to help, you know. I told her about all that. She was like, oh yeah, cool, I'll produce it. And her husband is a musician who's actually just nominated for a regional Emmy Award. So he came up with some theme music, so we launched our first episode in September 2019, you know, over 2 years after the idea first came about. So, you know, it was kind of a long process, but we just decided that audio was the best way to tell these stories. And then And the LLC, I said, formed in October of 2017, shortly after the idea, when there was going to be a blog. And to talk more about the name of it, the Black Belt represents a region in the U.S. South. I really didn't know this term until I started researching words to describe Black Southerners. But if I lived in Alabama or Mississippi, I would be more familiar with it because they have Black Belt counties that talk about themselves being in the Black Belt. The expanded definition is kind of the counties in the South where Black people outnumber white folks. And unfortunately, it's a very high poverty area, low economic opportunities, because that's where it used to be a very much an agricultural area. So that's why it has the name Black Belt. Number one, for the soil. The soil was rich and fertile. They grew cotton and other crops. Second reason was because after the enslaved Africans were emancipated, they continued to live in the area, and then it had a double meaning, meaning the Black people who lived there. So we took the word Black Belt and expanded it to mean Black Southerners. And my personal why is that, this is kind of out of order a little bit, but it was about the Black Southern stories, but it was also because I recognized that change makers and social impact organizations like the nonprofits in our area, all those nonprofits in Little Rock, we face systemic barriers to improving our communities. Lack of funding, lack of help, whatever that may mean. So as a Southerner, strategic communicator, and a storyteller, I want to help people tell stories with purpose that will lead to social change, and that's how Black Belt Media came about. So the tagline is storytelling for social change. And I have a friend who's a designer, just like Katrina's husband, Prentice. I told her, I was like, I'm looking for like a cotton ball mixed with an afro to kind of represent the South and agriculture and like kind of reclaiming cotton back. And she came up with that, and I was like, that's it. And then so underneath it's kind of small, it says storytelling for social change. So that's kind of Black Belt Media. It's evolved, like the podcast is on one side, and then my consulting work for like cause-driven organizations is on the other side. So in 2021, I went part-time at my job at the Conway Chamber of Commerce. The guy Isaac, who was on stage earlier, that's where he worked. We worked together there. And in 2022, I left that job completely, and now I have contract work and then the podcast. So it's been a neat journey. So that's kind of some background behind the brand. So the podcast side of things, we amplify the voices of Black folks down South working towards solutions to some of our region's biggest challenges. And we're about, 48 episodes in. We were seasonal at first, so we would do bi-weekly episodes for 6 months at a time. And so that's kind of the model we had at first. So actually, I just figured out September 25th will be the 5-year anniversary since our first episode release, which I plan to finally, yeah, it's exciting. So I plan to finally email I think I've contacted our email list like probably twice since I've started building it. Y'all be ashamed of my social media outreach side. But anyway, I'm planning to send an email about this. So anyway, we started off our first season. We just I just had that singular focus, Black folks down South. And I knew kind of what I wanted it to be. I wanted it to be like social impact folks trying to do things for social justice. But we talked to a bunch of cool folks. Our very first episode, answer to her question earlier, was about the U.S. Census because it was released in 2019. So the census was coming up in 2020. And so our co-host, Kara, was a contractor for like some organization that was helping get out the count. So we talked about the census on our very first episode. I think the next episode was about a UAMS researcher who got a big grant to tackle HIV research or something like that. So we just kind of talked about different people. Of course, the goal is to reach people across the South, but we're very heavy on Arkansas because that's who we're connected to. So our first season kind of had some really cool episodes like that. The gentleman at the bottom, his name is now he's a doctor, he got an honorary doctorate. Dr. Ronnie Williams, he was he just retired. He was an administrator at UCA. And so very well respected in Conway. If you went to UCA, you probably know this man. But anyway, what a lot of people didn't know was that his brother was died in March of 1960. And he was arrested for public intoxication, was taken to the Faulkner County Jail, and There was a tornado also that night that affected Ronnie's parents' family. Ronnie was about 5 at the time. Anyway, they got a call that the brother died because he tripped and fell down a flight of stairs. And that was in 1960. 25 years later, a white inmate wrote the parents a letter saying, your son Marvin was murdered by police. I saw it happen. Or like he maybe didn't see it, but heard it. So anyway, Ronnie was about 25 at the time. He worked with then Governor Bill Clinton to get the case reopened. It was a big deal in Conway back in 1985. And he has written a book about it called Markham Street. So, but at the time we interviewed him, he hadn't really told that story publicly. So he talked to us on the podcast. I think this is one of my favorite episodes. The content was very heavy, but also like the way we put it together. It's about 20 minutes. One was 20 minutes. One was like, we had 2 parts. The second was maybe like 10. But it was humbling because I remember when Katrina played it for me in the car and we were kind of previewing it, I just started crying because I just felt like this sense of, responsibility to tell that story with care. And so that was like the end of our first season, which wrapped up in February 2020. So in January of that year, I'll talk about the picture above. That was one of our most recent episodes, was about urban farmer here in Little Rock. Great story. We interviewed them in person. I'll get more into the stories later, but like those are 2 stories we've told. One kind of heavy, kind of about like the history of the South. One a little more lighthearted about some cool people doing some cool stuff for, food insecurity and just increasing access to foods. So those are just 2 of the challenges we talk about. So where I was getting at with the timeline, we wrapped up our first season in February of 2020. That was a rough year, 2020. But in January of that year, I think I had just sent an email to Apple because I heard on a different podcast, she was upset because her podcast was never featured, as a great business podcast. And she was someone I really learned a lot from as far as podcasting and business ownership. So when she said that, she would challenge herself by saying, but then I realized I never reached out to Apple. And I was like, oh, you can reach out to Apple? So I just sent an email saying, hey, Black History Month is in 2 weeks. Could we be featured in your Black History section? And then didn't think anything else about it. I don't even know if I got a response or not. But then it was on MLK Day. Katrina, Kara, and I were actually in a coffee shop, and we were talking about, the podcast. And so anyway, this is, I only tell y'all this because y'all are podcasters, but like, I just taken my phone to the Apple store to get something fixed. So it was like wiped clean. It didn't know who I was. And then so they were asking a question about when was our last episode released. I said, let me go check. So I went to Apple, and of course it doesn't know who I am, so I didn't have any of my stuff saved. But then I saw under new and noteworthy our logo, and I was just staring at it. I was like, my phone doesn't know me, so why is that here? And then like, Katrina's a picture of me like this, like, we're in the new and noteworthy section. So after that, downloads really increased after that. So that was exciting. That was in January. We ended our season in February with the Ronnie Williams and Marvin Williams episode. And then in the summer of 2020, you remember what happened. George Floyd was murdered. Ahmaud Arbery was killed. I hate that I'm forgetting the woman in Louisville. Breonna Taylor, yeah. So it was, we remember the racial uprising in 2020. And then after that, there was a renewed focus on DEI and Black creators, Black voices. So that was, I hate to say it was a benefit because it was a hard time, but the Apple feature helped. But then in the summer, I think publications were looking for podcasts to amplify. So of course they probably went to Apple. And so Oprah magazine, now it's just called something else, Oprah Daily. But Oprah magazine listed us as the 15 best educational podcasts to expand your mind. And I remember I was at work when I saw that one. And then Vanity Fair listed us on a list of 8 podcasts to deepen your knowledge of Black history. So like that, less than a year after we launched, we got a lot of big attention really fast. And so it was kind of, and it was nice. Of course, me being, I have a lot of issues. I was like, oh God, we gotta do better. So it's like, I used that, I was happy, but of course it was like very, we didn't expect it to take off like that because you just think maybe your family will listen, but then this happened. So that kind of, and I think one reason it happened was because of course the timing worked out because without all the racial reckoning, people thinking about race more deeply in 2020 helped us. But I think also what happened in January before all that happened was that I think Apple probably saw that email, and they're like, man, authenticity stood out, because they're probably like, these Black Southern girls or women are where they're filling the gap and they're using their authentic Black Southern voices to talk to different folks about issues that we care about. So I think authenticity was a big reason why it got attention. Also, belonging. One of our main goals is to create a sense of belonging among Black Southerners. Part of the reason for starting the podcast was because, it's hard to feel like you belong in the South when the only things people say about the South don't really fit your culture or fit who you are. And finally, connection. Storytelling is a way to connect with other people authentically. So I think those are kind of the ABCs of inclusive storytelling that we try to abide by. I'll try to breeze through these real quick. I was just trying to talk about Black Belts. Why? I talked about mine, now the Black Belts. 1, we believe our communities are stronger when everyone has a sense of belonging. We believe people should feel empowered to use their voices to co-create a better community, state, region, nation, and world. I'll stop on this one for a minute because I was talking to, remember your first name, I know it starts with a D. Yes, you, DeAndre. Earlier we were talking about today, this event today, and how we went from plan to create, and then I'll let you say it, we end with pivot. And I thought that was genius, because when you start your podcast, you have one idea, but then, or business or whatever it is, but you're always going to have that pivot. And I think we've pivoted a few times, but I feel like it's never pivoted from our main why and our values. We're just getting more clear on that. So going back to that earlier story I was talking about with the farmers, this guy, I was writing a story for the Arkansas Community Foundation, and he's a former military person. He bought some land in like, I forgot what neighborhood of Little Rock, but he just loves gardening. He loves vegetables, and he's so low-key about it. Like he doesn't want attention. He wants to help his community. He said people can't live off that processed shit all the time. Like, he said, and so he said, we always eat the same stuff all the time. He said, I didn't know what arugula was, and then I ate some, and I like it. And he said, we expand what we eat. Like, he's just very passionate. But like, I interviewed him for a written story, kind of like the same thing with the other woman. I was like, he needs to be on our show, because I wrote about him for a different magazine. So anyway, we finally got together with him this spring, and he's with another master gardener, Miss Laverne, and they just had such a good relationship, like just very cool. So we talked to both of them in person. Katrina was really good about getting like the natural sound of like the birds singing and all that stuff. And so that was a really nice episode, because he's kind of like our ideal, I feel like he's like the ideal guest. Like if I could have an avatar of our podcast guest, it's someone like that. Like, and I'm trying to get better at articulating that, but he's using his voice to create a better community. Like he wants people in his area, a neighborhood, to have access to healthy foods, because Trader Joe's and Whole Foods and Fresh Market aren't going to come to his neighborhood. So he wants to make sure people in that area can walk to get fresh produce and not have to go to the gas station and get some chicken roll-ups or whatever. So another why is that we believe that some voices have been historically undervalued and marginalized due to systemic racism and other intersecting oppressive systems. That's why we're talking to Black Southerners. Again, I think you said it earlier very well. It's not that we're talking to Black Southerners about Black Southerners, but that doesn't mean anyone can listen. But that's kind of who we're talking to, who we're talking about. That's who we're focused on. And we believe in the power of stories to shape a better society for all. Then you'll get into how we do it. We equip change makers across the South with the tools to tell their stories to create impact. So that's kind of for Black Belt broadly, through the contract work, through the podcast, but that's kind of what it's all about. Like trying to, we want to impact our communities and our region and our state. So that's kind of how we do it. We work with people and social impact organizations that are passionate about building strong, inclusive communities. And we use the power of storytelling to activate others to make an impact in the place they call home. This last piece is kind of part of our evolution, because I think it happens to the best of us. I don't know about all of you, but like we accidentally took a 1.5-year hiatus from the podcast. I can take all the blame for that. I switched roles. I had gotten that contract work. I just wasn't thinking about the podcast. And I knew we wanted to change how we did things, but I didn't know how to do that. And one thing we are exploring is, to really amplify the voice of the Black Southerners, we have to change the storytellers. And when I would give a talk about storytelling to different groups, I would always say that line, but now I'm thinking how it applies to Blackbelt. Like, I love telling the stories, love being a host and stuff like that, but like, I'm not the best person to tell a story about a rural community in North Carolina. But if I could get someone from there who had a neighbor and they talked to each other on the podcast, I'm creating a platform for them, but I'm not the one having to do it all. And so this is kind of where we're going next. And also we support individuals and social impact organizations that work to advance justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion across the South. That's what we do. And then we offer different opportunities to amplify stories that align with our core values of connection, belonging, and purpose. So going back to what I kind of teased earlier, here's what's next for the podcast and for us. This is, you can't see this, I'm sure, but this is kind of Blackbelt's model a little bit. So there's teaching, consulting, I can't read that, marketing and business operations. Podcasting is at the top. So you have Blackbelt voices and you have a podcast network. The podcast network seems like that's something that may not happen anytime soon. But I think NPR or New York Times, they have all these different podcasts under their umbrella with their little tiny logo on all of them. That would be a vision of mine, to work with podcasters with equal values of connection, equity, belonging, and have them under that Blackbelt umbrella. That would be a value of something that I want to happen one day. But now I learned about $75,000 grants out there. It may happen sooner than I thought. But anyway, so that's one option. And then, of course, continue the Blackbelt Voices podcast. This slide just shows like the grayed out parts that aren't happening right now, but that we hope to happen. So, the Blackbelt podcast, I was talking to one guy, I forgot his name, but he's here in Little Rock. He's all about collaboration. He's really, his name is, dang, I wish I could get it. He owns La Rosa Collective, if you're familiar with that. So he's a cool guy. So we were talking about just this kind of stuff. And I was telling him about someone who came to us wanting to start their own podcast. And then we were walking him through how to start a podcast and stuff. And I was telling him about this model I wanted to do with the network in the future, but not now. He was like, well, why don't he just come on your podcast as a host? And I'm like, oh. So that's kind of how the idea first started. So we started doing this this spring with Dr. Karama Neal. She's here in Little Rock, and she had a passion for telling stories about why people should choose Arkansas. She was born and raised in Arkansas. She's extremely smart. I forgot what her degrees were in. I don't know, something I don't understand, biochemistry, something.
Oh, she wasn't law?
Huh?
She wasn't a law degree?
No. Well, maybe she's law too, but it's like science. And so she went to, she lived in Atlanta for like 16 years. She went to school somewhere else. Like, she's just so accomplished. But she and her husband, who's actually from, I forgot what country in Africa, he's from Africa, they agreed to move back to Arkansas, and they've stayed and made a home here in Little Rock. So she wants to tell stories of Arkansans like herself who left the state and chose to come back. Like, so I'm not really someone she wants to talk to, but just those people who made that choice. Like, Dr. Chris Jones, we were just talking about him. He went to Morehouse and he went to MIT, but he just chose to come back to Arkansas. So she needed a place to tell. She wanted to tell stories for a long time, but when I was talking about this idea, we did a 3-episode run with her that just ended like last week. We released the last episode. And so our most recent episodes are of Dr. Karama Neal speaking with someone who chose Arkansas. And so far they've all been Black Arkansans. If she has her own platform one day, she can probably choose to diversify that, but to be consistent with our story, she's only talked to Black people so far. But so yeah, that's been a good partnership. And I think in the future, how it may look, we have a Turn to Your Neighbor segment that Katrina leads, and it's like probably like a 5 or 6 minute episode that's on our feed. So Katrina would talk to someone in a Turn to Your Neighbor, just someone that's not as tied to like some of our big things we're trying to talk about. So one season we talked about, racism in banking and stuff like that. And so we got real deep. So Katrina's was more like just talking to your neighbor. So that could be an avenue where we kind of share the mic with someone, where we had that North Carolina rural person talk to their friend in that segment. That's about 5 to 7 minutes. So our listeners can know what to expect, when they see that come up. So finally, here's the podcast feed. It doesn't go to the website, it goes to Simplecast. I have a lot of things to about getting everything on the website. But that's really all I have for today, and I can take questions if y'all have any.
I have a question.
Yes.
So, I don't even know how to approach it. So, in our show, which is obviously very different, we went into it thinking it was going to be really lighthearted. But apparently when you dig into history of any small town, it gets dark really fast.
Yeah.
And most of the time it involves racism. And that is not just in the United States. That's every global cryptid we have. Like everything we have dealt with has at some point dialed back to some kind of racism. What advice, just general advice, do you have for us too that are diving into these weird stories to help educate people through this journey? Because ultimately we want to use this as a tool to help educate people about that culture and about the belief system around that culture, not just, for instance, like one of them may be a tribe that believes of it as more of a forest spirit. Like how do you help people understand you can have a spiritual significance and a cultural significance and a biological, you see what I'm trying to, is that making sense? Like how can we help guide people and be respectful of everyone across the board?
Yeah, so instead of kind of like, for us it may seem kind of weird or strange, but like trying to be respectful about it and stuff like that.
For sure, or even in Conway, there was a cryptid that they made up in the 20s, I want to say, back when they were first putting it in the lake, and white people just made it up to keep the black people from fishing it.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it was literally just made up to keep people away. It's wild. Yeah, I'll tell you all about
That's fascinating.
Yeah, and
So like
how do we share that with people to like educate, but also keep it entertaining, but like use that as a tool to promote this, to promote understanding, and that.
I think even thinking about it the way you are is a good start, and try to keep it in your voice, but to continue to spread that message. I think just like you said, like using the locals, I guess, as much as possible, like. Not changing the storytellers, like completely giving the mic over like I'm talking about, but like having them say some of the stuff that you may not want to say. And I think that would be, I think that'll be a good approach, because I think one thing I heard, if you want to change the stories, you have to change the storytellers. And then so it's y'all's platform, y'all be the main ones narrating it, but maybe that's when someone else kind of does the heavy lifting about their community and their rituals and cultures. But I think there's some cool people I follow out there. One's called Heartthrob Anderson. He has a bunch of funny videos about like shows from the 90s, and sometimes some of them are so toxic, and he'll go through and like kind of make fun of it. But it's so funny. But he's like making good points about like how insane this Touched by an Angel was when this woman turned herself black, and then she prayed that she wasn't black, so she wouldn't be killed by these people. Anyway, so he does it in a funny way, but he's still making a good point. So yeah, that's I didn't know that about Conway though. I want to hear that.
Yeah, I'll send you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Any more questions? Oh yes.
Hi, it's not really a question. I just want to say I really appreciate you for bringing those kind of stories to life. As somebody has dealt with like police brutality, and I had my thumb bit back by an officer, just recently. So I understand that racism doesn't really have to be a thing unless you make it a thing, but it also can be a deep topic that needs to be discussed, especially with people in power. I'm not for calling somebody an oppressor because they wear a badge. Not everybody's an oppressor, but I'm all for highlighting moments where people have taken super aggressive chances with people and end up killing them. Because I feel like I very easily could have been somebody that was ended up being murdered in a jail cell because I was falsely accused of something.
Yeah.
So I really appreciate you just opening up that door, and I hope that you continue to grow and that more people are more aware that we're not trying to make it a color war. It's more about understanding that some people do take their authority too seriously and they use it for the wrong reasons.
Oh yeah.
So I really appreciate you. I followed your podcast.
Oh, good. Thank you.
So
Thank you.
Hopefully I'll get a free moment to hear it.
Oh yes, I hope so too. Yes.
So thank you so much.
Oh,
Have a great one.
yeah, you too. Thanks so much.
Yeah, no problem.
Oh yes, go ahead.
Sorry if I missed it at the beginning, but what is your background? Are you a professor or journalist?
Oh yeah, he's a professor. I am a public relations professional, and I did have to major in journalism to get that degree, but I've never worked in journalism. So PR background, communications. Katrina also she actually has a journalism degree as well, and PR experience. So we're kind of like a team, basically journalism. So yeah, thank you though. There's something else I was going to add. I forgot. Oh yeah, when she was talking about like, I guess not trying to just focus on race. I think going back to the pivot, you know, at the beginning, it was kind of out of anger and kind of about like election results and what people were talking. It's like, I want to tell more Black stories. But like, I think at the heart of it, what we're getting closer and closer to, I'm learning more like, I think Black Southern stories are the vehicle, but the mission is like community, belonging, connection. That's the mission. But I'm using Black stories to get there. So that's why when I'm on the consulting side, I just don't work with Black organizations. I work with any organization that wants to improve their community. One is Excel by 8. We do early childhood development for kids prenatal to 8. One is a Black philanthropy collaborative. So it's like, so one is Black, but like it's more about the community, us being human, belonging, and then for the podcast, we're using Black Southern stories to demonstrate that. But for one season, I'm a big fan of NPR's Code Switch. You're familiar? So they talk about race a lot, and like they really dive deep into topics about race and not just Black and white, but like any race and how it impacts society. So like I would like them so much. I think in one season I was trying to be them a little bit. So we had themes that season. It was probably season 2 or maybe season 3. So we had like one time we had the cost of racism. We had these different topics, which were good, but as we kind of talked about earlier, I felt like a little like it was over my head. Well, we always talk we're narrative style plus interview. So like we interviewed a guest, Katrina goes back and writes a great script, Kara and I would come and read it and do the script together. So we relied on the guest's expertise, but then it got a little too like, it did feel a little more academic than what I probably wanted to start with. They weren't stories as much, I guess. But then we would follow up with a turn to your neighbor that related to that topic. So one, we were talking about, we talked to anthropologists about Black food culture and like all the, like, kind of basically racism in the food system. It was a great episode, very informative. And then the next episode was a turn to your neighbor, where we just talked to the owner of a restaurant in El Dorado. So we kind of did like high level up here, and then we talked to the person doing the stuff. So I did like that model that we did, but I think it was a little too on the nose with like, this is about race and racism. But now I'm realizing we're definitely gonna talk about race, like as Black people, that's what you kind of got to in America. So it's like, we're gonna talk about that, and then, but we'll do it in a different way. Like we're talking about the urban farmer, but like race was there, but it wasn't as much about race as a science or as an area of study, where I was trying to get to a little bit, but now I'm realizing that's not my lane. My lane is more like telling the story of a community and not ignoring our differences, but also talking about, our commonalities.
Have you had a moment that you're like, this is exactly why I do this? Or have you had moments that keep you going to remind you why you do this in the first place? Yes, I think the Ronnie Williams episode that first season was, and I think the urban farming episode was one, and that actually was kind of, speaking of grants, I think we've gotten 2 grants. One was from the Solutions Journalism Network, and it was for Black media, which is hard for me to call myself media, but like Black media and HBCU educators. We were in a cohort for about 9 months, and then we all got like a stipend to tell solutions journalism stories. So basically, not just talking about all what's wrong with the place, but framing it around solutions. So that's one reason I talked to Gabe, because I wanted to talk to him for a long time, but then I was forced to for this grant. So that was a good way to get me back out there after that 1.5 years. So that was one that reminded me, because we can't go everywhere in person, especially when we be across the South, but we did that one in person, and just like, it just was a good reminder, because like I felt connected to him and to Miss Laverne, and it just felt good, and I felt like this is why we're doing this. So I think it's those moments when I just really feel a true connection. It doesn't feel transactional, like, oh, I want to be your podcast, I have a book coming out. When it feels more like you're doing something cool over here and no one knows about it. Like that's when it really feels good. Yeah. Yes. You said genuine? Yeah. Any others?
Okay, so I know you mentioned the two stories that you had highlighted in the slide. Do you have maybe a third that was like one of your most favorites, or ones that you just kind of, because I want to have a note of a few to go back and
Oh yeah. Share your favorite. You come share your favorite.
My favorite is the one that we did with Karam and
Oh, no. Oh, not Karama, but yeah,
Oh, Carmion.
Carmian, yes.
Carmion Hamilton. She graduated from UCA. She has a graphic design degree, and she has since become like, she's got a show.
HGTV, yeah.
She's just everything. But something she said in that podcast episode that I've never forgotten is like, what are some ways we were talking about ways to improve your space if you don't have a big budget? She said plants. If you put a plant in there, she said basically we are just complicated plants. And I took that to heart, and I have fallen in love with them since that episode. And I don't know, it's just kind of lighthearted, like just something to improve your space around you, and then just hearing her why and why she got into it. And, I don't know, it's my favorite.
And that was season 1. So she was like bringing up the plants before we all became plant moms during COVID. So it was like early in season 1. So probably like late 2019, early 2020. And then so that was a good one. And I used to have her picture on the slide, but I took it off to put the new one. Go ahead.
And Chris Jones, too.
Oh yeah, Chris Jones was a good one. Yeah. We talked to him before he ran for governor, and so that was pretty cool, just because he's a cool person. So, and again with the plant one, it was fun and lighthearted. It wasn't about this is about race, but like we're talking to a black woman who celebrates her blackness and talks about it, uses it in her interior design business. So it's kind of like it's there, but like it's not a podcast about race like Code Switch is, which I love those, but that's not what we're trying to do. So we can't lose sight. We keep our sight on what we're really trying to accomplish. So.
But I don't know if we were talking about this before, but Chris Jones's episode, he had this analogy about coals. Like when you're barbecuing for a fire, he said you get the strongest heat when you pile them all up together.
Mm-hmm.
And it just made me think about that's belonging and connection. How we're all better when we're working together. And I'm just now in my mind connecting that was a belonging thing.
Mm. The email I'm going to send I'm going to include that quote from that podcast. Yes, good. Thank you. All right, I think everyone's good. Oh, yes.
Do you have a topic or a person that you would love to interview that you haven't talked about yet?
Oh, and I have a whole list of people that I want to talk to, but I'm trying to think. I can't think of any specific names. But the people that I usually, when I see them and I write them down, I'm trying to think what they have in common. They're usually they're black and Southern, of course, but like, they just speak with passion about, and I think they challenge narratives a lot. I feel like the people who challenge narratives are the ones I always gravitate to. Like they challenge what it means to be black, Southern, and not challenge it, they celebrate it, but they also challenge stereotypes, they challenge people's ideas about the South, they challenge, or about rural people or whatever. I think those are the folks I like when I come across them. Actually, someone today, Portia, she left, but she shared about there's a man in Little Rock. He goes by Ray the Catfish Man or something. I'm trying to think what it was. But yeah, anyways, it's written out somewhere. But like what she was telling me was like he's really into the science and the biology of these catfish. He's like an 80-something-year-old man. But I don't know his formal schooling or anything, but I'm sure he just like learned by doing it. And so he just seems like a cool person. Yeah. And then I was thinking about, I think Katrina shared something with me on social media where like buffalo fish has a very rich like black Southern Arkansas tradition, which I didn't know. So now I'm thinking like, okay, his story as like the personal example plus like the history of buffalo ribs fish or whatever, that could be a cool story. So I was like, so anyway, things like that are kind of like real cool and like, it can be history, it can be just celebrating culture, it can be shaping the future of the region. So those are 3 things we kind of want to talk about. Celebrating our history and our culture, and then also like people who are making a better future in the South. So, yeah. Oh yeah, real quick, we talked about monetization. I'll go over that real quick. We've gone the sponsorship route. So Southern Bancorp was an early sponsor of ours. And the gentleman who asked that earlier is in here. But like I basically came up with a price. I had one price, and once Oprah got some attention, I raised it a little bit. So really, like I gave them a proposal, and we sat down, they accepted it, and like we did pre-roll ads for them, no mid-rolls, just pre-rolls. But the Turn to Your Neighbor segments, we gave them 6 of those. So they could give us 6 names of people to interview, and they didn't care if that person said their name or not. They said this person started like a garden with her loan, and this person got a debt. So we talked to those people, Katrina did, and then those were our Turn to Your Neighbor segments sponsored by Southern. And so another way, We had the 2 grants. I forgot the other one was for another Southern journalism type program. We're not a nonprofit, but like both were open to like for-profits. And then another ad, people reached out to me from the Southern Environmental Law Center. Their ads are running now. They reached out because I think we've niched down pretty good so that ideal sponsors are reaching out. And those would be people I wouldn't mind working with on the consulting side either. So I wanted to be kind of hand in glove. Like you'll be a good consulting client and you can also have a spot over here. So that's our model right now. So yeah, thank you all for your time.
Thank you.
All right.